What is it that I'm looking for within a potential drama therapist in terms of this notion of therapeutic presence? In working in a theatre school with, amongst courses in acting and movement and dance and so on, and being on a course which works very much with drama and with movement, there are questions about, well, how might drama therapeutic be present? The drama therapeutic presence be different to therapeutic presence in a more conventional sense. So those questions started to emerge. For example, in being in an improvisation, how is one's presence different? How is the script different? How is how does spontaneity affect presence? Questions like this started to be around for me. I looked at some writing by Marie-Louise von Franz, where she is talking about individuation, Jung's idea of individuation. She refers to Zen Buddhism and a series of images called the 10 ox-herding pictures. But the final image is of a monk who has reached enlightenment, who returns to the marketplace and who walks under a cherry tree, and the blossom and the tree blossoms as he walks underneath it. And she uses that image as analogous to his presence, the eminence that comes from this individual who has gone through the process of doing the inner work and therefore has an effect on the environment. The impetus behind the research was to try and shine a light on a feeling I had, which is that drama therapy, which employs play and improvisation and drama, within that the presence of the therapist is important, and that's a very difficult thing to monitor, and that's a very difficult thing to prescribe. And so that was partly the problem. How, as a trainer, do we create a course or the conditions within a course to support this idea of presence? And what is that presence? What does it mean?
10 ox-herding paintings is a really kind of clear, sequential method. It's a model where you start with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then once you've completed those 10 contemplations, you then go back to 1. So the practice in the 10 ox-herding paintings is cyclical. And in some way, once the idea of the circle and the cycle, that there's no real kind of clear beginning and end. And there's an interesting dimension there of the kind of the process of repetition and the kind of learning and the kind of knowledge and the kind of realization that arises from cyclical repetition. So this was also something that we started to bring into our research inquiry. We used a number of performative and performance-based actor training methods that had similarly cyclical and repetitive processes that gave the actor possibilities to kind of train and realize qualities within him or herself.
For example, we worked one week with some exercises based on the psychological gestures as outlined by Michael Chekhov, and these gave us a very clear structure to work with some exercises to examine and explore what might be this notion of presence, what was happening in the space, and then that was captured on film.
We came up with the idea of filming part of the research process, so to actually start to capture on film a group of students who we worked with, sort of professional drama therapists, who joined us to explore and to wonder and to investigate what presence is, what it might look like, and especially under the context of how it might be delivered as part of a training.
very idea of practice as research, as a methodology, meant that we didn't actually know necessarily what we were looking for, and in that sense, the filming that was done by Bryn was, in a sense, simply tracking the work and what was emerging in the work, which we've documented on the film. We felt when we were editing afterwards that there were moments where something was revealed in terms of a connection. And in terms of tracking our research inquiry, that we felt was relevant to presence. How did these exercises and the repetition that we sometimes employed, how did that have an effect on the presence of the participant, the availability, the closure, the physicality of the participants? If the therapeutic relationship is central, does that then require a training therapist to look at how they are and what their presence is working with a client?
This idea of how the therapist is, the presence of the therapist, the being of the therapist, and thinking about models which may support the therapist in discovering and growing their own particular unique presence. Things come to light gradually. Things begin to emerge through the research process. And again, for me, this was echoing the way that the 10 ox-herding paintings is a training process. That there are outcomes, but that things can come out in many different ways and at many different times. It's not a linear process that has a beginning, a middle and an end, and there's the fruit. But that at any point along that journey, something new may arise, something new may be revealed, and the 10 ox-herding paintings allows space for that new to be recognised, to be realised, to be internalised, to be held, to be assimilated, and then you carry on with the training. And then the next time round, something new may emerge in a completely different place. The things that come out, the outcomes, that there's no real there's no real kind of previous sense that that's what you're looking for. So for example, in this image that we started off with, that Ron Franz had drawn attention to, that as the monk walks past the tree, the cherry blossoms come into bloom. There's no way prior to that, there's no point prior to that where there's any idea that, okay, if you do these trainings, when you walk past cherry blossom trees, they will come into bloom. It's just something that happens anyway. It's just this kind of, it's like a byproduct. But it's a sign of something. It's a sign, it signifies something. And I think in the same way, as we were filming those sessions with the research group, things arose, things occurred, things happened that we could clearly see as being a sign of something like presence, but there was no kind of no preemptive idea that that's what we were looking for, or that's what we were trying to work towards. There were things that arose through the meeting of that group in that space at that time that happened to be illustrative of something like therapeutic presence. They arose from the encounter.
The Sesame course at Central, I think, is this pedagogy where, alongside the skills base, there's a paradoxical turn which is also about unlearning. And I think that turn is informed by Jung's psychology, where actually the best therapeutic contact happens where form previous form is thrown out of the window, which facilitates a contact in the present moment. So we have this relationship which emerges between form and spontaneity. And there's a thread that was really guiding our research inquiry as well. So on the course, how do we cultivate, this was part of the question, in a student, the capacity to both learn the techniques and then discard the techniques, so that the present moment is not cluttered up by the thought processes of where do I fit that into my conceptual framework or theoretical frame, but the capacity to let that go and be present in the moment.
Something in his presence captivated me. And I was wondering, what is it that has been communicated between this person and me as an audience that had nothing to do with cognitive understanding or humor or physical presence or attractiveness in that way, nothing to do with that, but was something that kept me really fascinated.
Our presence in the moment is a combination of repeating forms and non-repeating forms. And that repeating forms are the letters of the alphabet, words, concepts, agreed upon images, things that we use to describe in moments. You can combine as many of those forms as you want to, and you will never capture the fullness of experience, which always includes a sliver, a remainder of non-repeating elements. And it is that ever expanding edge that leads us to create new forms, because you're aware of the fact that whatever you're thinking as thought arises to capture the present moment and fails, and you're aware that that remainder, that leads to then the rise of new thought to capture that remainder, which then leads then to another remainder. And that's why thought moves. When you ask yourself, why does thought move? Why is there a stream of consciousness? It's because of the experience is ultimately non-repeating. Each and every moment that we are here is a new moment. There has never been the exact combination of sensations and positions and atoms and molecules as there is in each moment. So the present moment is constantly arising in a surprising manner for us. So presence really has to do with capturing that fullness of experience that includes the non-repeating element, and spontaneity, spirit, impulse, originality, awe, delight, alarm, all of these fundamental things arise out of the experience of knowing what the forms are, but then also appreciating that there is this other aspect. And that's what we would call presence. So therapeutic presence and drama therapeutic presence to me would mean the person, the therapist, being able to communicate that sense of discrepancy. And whether you call it becoming, this is where becoming arises out of this expanding remainder that keeps moving out beyond us, or aliveness. I mean the unformed, the as yet unformed piece of experience that makes this moment different from every other moment.
Theatrical presence, it's really connected for me with being here and now. And in that way, it's almost like a Buddhist concept. But the question is, how do we develop all set of skills, techniques, abilities to help performer to be here and now? Really being reflective about yourself in the work. and how like it's all the time like going in and out. There is this Verfremdung effect in Brecht's writing, and I think it's it's many points, close points with psychotherapy, because like Brecht was writing about this we effect, meaning that at the same time actor and directors are like observing themselves completely from outside while they're completely in the action, in the work.
It's not really about how someone physically looks. It's not necessarily about the quality of movement. It's not about certain grace or elegance. It's more about truthfulness, rendering something truthful by virtue of the people present and the people involved. So I think it's more of a, it's difficult to describe. It's more of a certain quality of being, if it's anything. What's the truthful nature of the encounter? What's the truthful nature of the being present?
I think presence is sort of, I think there is, it's not just about a doing thing, but about a being there for the other person. So somebody's, in their own space for a bit, maybe doing a drawing, or they just want to have a bit of time in their own space to maybe think about things or just rest, and they'll maybe look up at you every once in a while just to see that you're still there. And you can never kind of underestimate how just being there, the presence of just being there can be a very kind of containing thing as somebody's engaged in, whatever it is they're engaged in. I think sometimes it's the very smallest gestures that or just the sort of smallest looks, or just often the quiet, still moments, and the sort of the little spaces in between things happening that are kind of important.
Well, after starting, let's say, this dialogue internally and externally, I'm also start thinking a lot of how my presence comes across to others, so the intensity of my presence, which sometimes it may be of my good intentions to be there and meet others and go too far out. With that may be for some people too overwhelming, so it's how much to be more aware of my presence more around rather than forward.
I think being present to myself allows clients to sometimes become into presence, if that makes sense. So it's a strange dance between self and other.
Being receptive to the other person and what the other person is coming with and what they're offering. Giving them an experience of receptivity, which might simply be listening and attentiveness, or it might be a kind of maybe a mirroring of something that the other person's doing. I mean, for instance, in improvisation, you're always wanting to say yes and to the other person's offer, and sort of not block the other person's offer. So being open to the kind of offers to play.
The more we think about it, it's a bit like a dream. Like, did we mention this ever in the discussions? It's a bit like a dream. Like, the more you try to hold the dream, it's like trying to catch a fish that it would just slide away. It's a bit like with our minds when we are... All it's great, I mean, but it's sort of like it slips away. And I think I find it more in the experience of embodied experience. And it was really striking for me, I think, when we did our own embodied movement sequence of what presence looked like for us. That was a really powerful experience of maybe just feeling, being with it, not necessarily understanding it.
I think through a constant process of check or awareness of me, and sometimes it may be very physical, like checking or being aware of how my body is present, and so maybe how unconsciously I may be holding tensions that they are visible to others, but I'm not so aware of, and tensions in my face, in my posture, and my voice, my rhythm, and things like that. But then that's, again, it's a very subjective measurement, because I am measuring and observing this. Now, in terms, in relation to other, I guess by observing the quality of the relationship and maybe changes of the relationship. I'm also thinking as well, if there is a polarity, and I don't know if that's the correct word, but if there is a kind of plus and minus kind of side of it, and there are people that your therapeutic presence and their presence may really meet and create a kind of exchange that can work therapeutically for this relationship, and maybe you meet people that you have minus, that in somehow you don't untune with, and it may not a therapeutic relationship, or a relationship may not actually go so much into creating having therapeutic aspects. And how aware can we be of that?
Any of the qualities that you would want to bring and have available as a therapist to, for the patient.
Mm-hmm.
And, that might be something very different in any given moment, and it might be changing all of the time. I mean, you might want to be offering a nurturing presence. You might want to, sometimes it might be more useful to have a presence which is quite sort of, I don't know about challenging, but quite sort of, quite a sort of strong presence where, they might want to challenge you. Many drama therapists work with a lot of kind of natural objects, which are sort of useful ways to come into the particular moment. I think being sensitive to the actual reality of the current moment anyway is important, to be present with yourself, and whatever the season is, whatever the time of day is, all of these, an awareness of where you've travelled to get to the space, an awareness of where the other person might have travelled to get to the space, and how that might have influenced their sort of being present as well.
I am telling stories to children through an enacted way. There is something that I can't really articulate what is happening. Sometimes I even just translate. It's almost magical sometimes, that almost they are enchanted by something. And it happens usually when I am enchanted by the story or the images, or I don't speak to them, for example, with this typical voice that we use to children, but I am more authentic with myself, and so they are more drawn into me. Now something else came into my mind, but it has to do with children. But sometimes in the buses, I have noticed that I'm sitting, let's say, on my chair, and there are children in the pushchair area, and they are sitting in this pushchair. And they are turning and look at me and look at me and look at me, and then I may smile at them and smile to me, and we are playing non-verbally, just with our eyes. And there is a whole relationship being there. It's like, and then I'm thinking, what is that make that their gaze stopped at me and they were looking at me like that? And it may mean many things. It may be just because I wear too many colors, or maybe because I have a different face than, I don't know. But it also started to make me think of how if there is a kind of intangible quality in what we call presence that is being communicated, and we are not so conscious about.
How do you achieve the presence? Because obviously the tendency of the mind is to escape. And we can very well be telling the text and doing very complicated set of physical actions while the mind is somewhere on the street or some exotic place or in cafe. If an actor is not present, he or she becomes predictable in a way, because he or she is thinking few steps in advance.
Acting techniques, all of them are attempting to get the actor to step outside of the script, which is the established form. If you play the script exactly, it's dead. If you are a therapist and you play the therapist role exactly, it's dead. So the client or the other person is aware of when the other person is not quite in these boxes. So it means having a duality, a distinction, a discrepancy constantly within one's behavior.
So very often I allow myself to be in the realm of I don't know. So that and it is very contradictory with the training that directors do get at the theater schools, because we were taught to have answers, to provide answers. The director has always to have all these concepts and answers and so on. And I actually learned that it's very false, at least for me. It's, of course, that I do have many ideas and concepts, but it's very important also to go into this realm of the unknown and to be ready to open that and to be honest about that. And I think this is, again, something about the presence and maybe this situation of psychotherapist, because if psychotherapist is ready also to be open about not having all answers, not being able to provide the way always, then the whole new territory of the trust maybe could be, established.
The question for drama therapy would be, what is the fitness for purpose? So then, therefore, what are the things that need to be practiced? What is the form that then has to be unformed through subconscious being? It's the point when form is embodied, but the embodiment of that form is so known that it becomes unknown, to give them the freedom to just be. But of course, when they step into space, they will carry that sense of form. Because the point of performance is communication and expression, and the point of drama therapy is to be able to be in a space and to facilitate your client's ability to engage in their struggles. So and to go into the unknown and to feel comfortable about going into the unknown. So the presence of the therapist or the healer is someone who can be that guide to say, hold my hand while I go into the dark, please?
It's really very complex because the presence is not only about present time. I mean, it is being in the moment, but who are we? We consist of the past, present, and the future. And so, how to embrace all of those three concepts, past, present, and future? How can actor do that? And so what we do is like, again, being on the two horses, let's say. Like, one is the work with the inner story that we do a lot, meaning that the actor is really developing very detailed inner story when he or she is improvising. And so that means that senses are engaged and imagination is engaged, and it's very, very precise. It should be very, very precise. And then in the same moment, being somewhere in the inner story, and it could be wherever. I mean, they could be in their childhood, in their inner stories, and at the same time being on the stage. They need to be aware of the audience, of the partners, of everything else. So in that sense, it's really like a very complex job. So how really they can at the same time keep their inner motivations, inner story alive, and how they can be aware of the present moment. And I think it's the life work of the actor, of the performers, and of the director. Are there skills and techniques that can help that? And in my experience, like the more concrete obstacles, more concrete tasks actor deals with, it can help her or him to be more present. Being very aware of the inner story, so doing it like in your mind very precisely, but then at the same time one needs to really like be aware of the text, for example, that is not necessarily connected with inner story, because sometimes there is this double logic of what is going inside of the actor and what are the actions outside, because the director put that together in a certain context. And then there is the how then awareness about the partner, and then it could be very demanding physical score, or it could be a very demanding vocal or musical score that they have to deal with. So in that sense, I think about very, very concrete things.
With basketball, the point is getting the ball in the hoop and stopping other people from doing it. With dance, it's about using your body in a particular way to express emotion and feel in abstract flow. The form of the therapist is the confidence to be in a space physically that will give the person who is coming into an unknown space the confidence that they can take them there. Working with people on an intuitive level to go into a terrain, it's a kind of almost like emotional mythic bios. But then you're talking about how is the form functioning as a way for the person to critically reflect on how they are getting to know or exploring the internal terrain. There is an inner confidence and an inner peace and a way of moving the body which betrays a kind of understanding of form.
The 10 ox-herding pictures and their accompanying poetic verses are drawn from Chinese antiquity and form a key element in Zen training. Their general function is akin to that of a map, or a series of signposts for those individuals who have embarked on a specific journey. For some they may be helpful, for others they may become a hindrance. The general advice given to the practitioner is to please not let them become too much of a hindrance, but to use them, to orientate the self, to clarify the way, ultimately to move on, to let them go, to forget them. Undisciplined. With his horns fiercely projected in the air, the beast snorts. Madly running over the mountain paths, farther and farther he goes astray. A dark cloud is spread across the entrance of the valley, and who knows how much of the fine, fresh herb is trampled beneath his wild hooves. Discipline begun. I am in possession of a straw rope, and I pass it through his nose. For once he makes a frantic attempt to run away, but he is severely whipped and whipped. The beast resists the training with all the power there is in a nature wild and ungoverned. The rustic ox-herd never relaxes his pulling tether and his ever-ready whip. In harness. Gradually getting into harness, the beast is now content to be led by the nose, crossing the stream, walking along the mountain path. He follows every step of the leader. The leader holds the rope tightly in his hand, never letting it go. All day long, he is on the alert, almost unconscious of what fatigue is. Faced round. After long days of training, the result begins to tell, and the beast is faced round. A nature so wild and ungoverned is finally broken. He has become gentler. But the tender has not yet given him his full confidence. He still keeps his straw rope, with which the ox is now tied to a tree. tamed. Under the green willow tree, and by the ancient mountain stream, the ox is set at liberty to pursue his own pleasures. At the eventide, when a grey mist descends on the pasture, the boy wends his homeward way, with the animal quietly following. Unimpeded. On the verdant field the beast contently lies idling his time away. No whip is needed now, nor any kind of restraint. The boy too sits leisurely under the pine tree, playing a tune of peace, overflowing with joy. Laissez-faire. The spring stream in the evening sun flows languidly along the willow-lined bank. In the hazy atmosphere, the meadow grass is seen growing thick. When hungry, he grazes. When thirsty, he quaffs, as time sweetly slides. While the boy on the rock dozes for hours, not noticing anything that goes on around him. All forgotten. The beast, all in white now, is surrounded by the white clouds. The man is perfectly at his ease and carefree. So is his companion. The white clouds, penetrated by the moonlight, cast their white shadows below. The white clouds and the bright moonlight, each following their course of movement. The solitary moon. Nowhere is the beast, and the oxherd is master of his time. He is a solitary cloud, wafting lightly along the mountain peaks. Clapping his hands, he sings joyfully in the moonlight. But remember, a last wall is still left barring his homeward walk. Both vanished. Both the man and the animal have disappeared. No traces are left. The bright moonlight is empty and shadowless, with all the 10,000 objects in it. If anyone should ask the meaning of this, behold the lilies of the field and their fresh, sweet scent.